Good Shabbos again, everyone, and please be seated. So as you know, we Jews are a religion of streaks. We've been circumcising our 8-day-old sons for over 3,000 years, chanting the Torah in synagogues weekly and lighting the Hanukkah candles for 8 straight nights for over 2,000 years. But now we can add another streak to the history of our people. You would never guess who has the current longest winning streak in NCAA college basketball. Now you might think it's Gonzaga or Kansas or Duke. None of them. Across all levels of men's college basketball, the team with the longest winning streak is the Yeshiva University Maccabees. I'm not making this up. Now with victories going back several years, the team is riding a 49-game winning streak. There actually was an article about them this morning in the Houston Chronicle. Now, what is Yeshiva University? Besides being the most Jewish college in America, it's a very prominent, mid-sized university that was established almost 100 years ago. To attend Yeshiva University, you don't have to be Jewish, but most are. And most are Orthodox Jews, as the dual curriculum includes daily secular and religious studies, plus morning prayer every day. The basketball team, as you can imagine, has many good players, including 6'7" senior guard Ryan Terrell, who's averaging 23 points over his college career and is actually being watched as a possible future NBA player. His dream is to become the NBA's first Orthodox Jewish player. It's exciting. It's exciting to see that the most Jewish university in the United States has the longest current winning streak in college basketball and has a possible future NBA player on its team. The Yeshiva University Maccabees can make us all proud. But when I read about how good the team is, it made me want to find an answer. Why are they called the Maccabees? Because if you remember the story of Hanukkah, it's a very surprising name for any Jewish sports team. On Hanukkah, of course, we celebrate the Maccabees' revolt against the Greeks, who restricted Jewish religious practice. And that rebellion, of course, ended with the great miracle of the oil, the discovery of the holy temple lamp oil that should have burned for 1 day, but burns for 8 days. You know all of that. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the Maccabees weren't just fighting the Assyrian Greeks. They were fighting someone else as well. They were fighting secular Jews. In many ways, the Hanukkah story is about a Jewish civil war. The ancient Maccabees were fighting the Jewish Hellenists, the more assimilated and secular Jews. And the Maccabees felt so strongly against their more assimilated Jewish brothers and sisters because they had too much in their eyes in like with their Greek occupiers. And they were right. The assimilated Jews of the time embraced Greek culture, Greek study, and Greek sports. And the assimilated Jews of the time would fully participate in and attend the great spectator sports of the time, like gladiator fighting. The Maccabees were the religious group, the religious guys, who thought that all the free time shouldn't be wasted going to attend Greek sporting events like gladiator fighting, but rather all of our free time should be used to promote Jewish culture, Jewish learning, Torah study, prayer, and acts of tzedakah. The Maccabees fought against assimilated Jews who embraced the popular Greek customs of the time, like spectator sports. Sports was seen as corrupting, and even to sit as a spectator in the eyes of the Maccabees was considered a sin. Thus, the seeming contradiction in naming a Jewish sports team after the Maccabees. And of course, it's not just the Orthodox Yeshiva University. There's the famous Maccabi Tel Aviv basketball team, the JCC Maccabee Games. And of course, for anyone who's ever attended a Jewish day camp or summer camp, the annual Color Wars, known as the Maccabiah. So why? Why do we use a name synonymous with a warring band of Jews who fought against practices like spectator sports for our current Jewish sports teams or Jewish sporting events? If anything, this should be the last name we should ever use. The answer is found in the story of an incredible man who lived over 100 years ago named Max Nordau. Max Nordau was a 19th century Zionist leader, physician, political activist, and author. And together with the great Theodor Herzl, Nordau was the co-founder of the modern Zionist movement. Nordau is credited as the founder as well of the Jewish athletic movement. Before that time, it was rare, if ever, to see Jews participating in sports, to even get involved in anything that involved physical exertion. And Nordau did it as an attempt to empower his fellow Jews to become more athletic. It was his way of rallying against the generally negative global image of Jews, which wasn't just that we were bad at sports, but something far more complex and all too often insidious, that we Jews were too bookish, too frail, and too weak. And this was a horrible reputation, centuries in the making. It didn't help that at the time, a majority of global Jewry lived in Eastern Europe, often the victims of pogroms and other deadly terrors that reinforced the idea of the feeble Jew. Nordau, speaking at the Second Zionist Congress back in 1898, coined the phrase muscular Judaism and chose the Maccabees as his template, as his example for the ideal modern Jew. Now, whether we grasp that the Maccabees were anti-sports is immaterial. In his eyes and in our eyes, the Maccabees were the perfect example because they were strong, they were fierce, they were brave, and they stood up for their Judaism, no matter the odds. In his eyes, they were the perfect role models for the type of Jews he wanted to create. And from then on, the Maccabees became positively associated with sports, with athletics, with exercise, with not just studying, but getting out of the house and taking care of our bodies as well. But it was a complex enough transition that Yeshiva University, which started its program back in 1935, didn't take on the Maccabee name until the 1970s. Until then, its teams were known as the Blue and Whites, and later, the Mighty Mites. Now, how does this information leave us today, you and I, as modern-day Jews, getting ready to celebrate the holiday of Hanukkah tomorrow night? In the Torah, recently, we've read about the story of Jacob and Esau. As you remember from the biblical stories, Esau is justifiably very angry about his brother Jacob. Jacob has bribed the birthright and stolen the blessing. And after 20 years, they're finally going to reunite. And Jacob is extremely scared. He's worried. And in preparation for that encounter, he sends gifts to Esau. He apologizes for what he did. He prays. And then when they encounter, Jacob bows down to Esau 7 times and calls him my Lord. And it works. Esau forgives Jacob, and they reunite as brothers again. And many of our commentators in the medieval period praised Jacob for his actions. The great Sophrona of the 16th century says Jacob should be the model for us all. Because for him and other Jewish leaders over the Middle Ages, the lesson was clear. The only way to escape the sword of our enemies is through self-degradation, to remain weak, to stay inside our homes, to only depend on God. They felt better to demean oneself than face up to an adversary. For 2,000 years, that was the plan. The only way to survive, according to the rabbis, was to bend to the will of our enemies, not to be like the non-Jews of the time, but rather to just remain weak and depend on God. But as we know, the result of that thinking was centuries of pogroms and massacres, culminating in the Holocaust. Today we live, thank God, in a very different era. In our post-Holocaust world, in our era of a strong Jewish state, that's no longer the case. Because today we proudly use the Maccabee name not because we associate it with spectator sports. Rather, we see the name as a positive reminder that we Jews can do more. We can study. We can pray. We can commit acts of tzedakah. We can be bookish, proudly so. And if we choose, at the same time, like the Maccabees of old, we can also be strong. We can also be fierce. We can also be brave. Today, we can look no further than our beloved state of Israel. Today, Israel has more Torah study going on, more yeshivas, more Talmudic preparation than at any point in the history of the Jewish people. And at the same time, the state of Israel has the most sophisticated and one of the most powerful armies in the world. Israel seems to be doing both. And so are we. Many of us are proud of our accomplishments in the workplace, the degrees that we attain, the Jewish learning that we try to take on. And yet we take for granted that as Jews we can get involved in sports, exercise, go to athletic clubs. And we don't always realize that when we do so, we're doing something that our great-great-grandparents never, ever would have thought to do. A great example, and one I'm a little biased for, is the Emery Weiner football team. And for those of you who don't know, yesterday, the Emery Weiner six-man varsity football team won the state semifinal. And my son got 2 touchdowns. But who's saying? Thank God he got his athletic abilities from my wife, not me. But who would have ever imagined that this upcoming Thursday, for the third time in its history, a Jewish high school, the only non-Orthodox Jewish high school in the state of Texas, would be competing for a state championship, not in chess, but in football. We truly live in remarkable times. These Emery Weiner students have worked their minds and their bodies. Let us never take that for granted. And may it always be God's will that we Jews can proudly try to do it all, working our minds and our bodies for the betterment of ourselves, for the safety of our people, and the betterment of humankind. And for a great example, let us look no further than the Yeshiva University Maccabee basketball team. Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and happy Hanukkah.